This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome everyone to our second SEL speaker series event of the year. I am really excited for this event. I have followed Patricia's work for a long time. I saw her in a TED Talk actually from another speaker at our series last year, I believe. So I'm really excited about tonight. Just a reminder before we get started, Greg Graber is here. He's going to introduce us to the series. I'll do a quick introduction for Patricia, but at any point, if anyone has questions, needs anything, I'll be here in the chat and you're welcome to jump in with questions. If you're watching this later, same thing. I'll put the chat transcript up as well, but you're also welcome to email me, Greg, or Patricia for any questions. So with that, Greg, I'll let you do a little intro and then we'll get started.
Thank you so much. Patricia, thanks for being here. I've heard great stuff about you from Amber and other people, and we're really excited we can make it work. We have a really robust social and emotional learning program at Lausanne Collegiate, and Amber helps us quite a bit with that in terms of getting these programs solidified and presenting them and community engagement. We're really excited. We're slated, typically we have 4 a year. I think this year we're looking at 3. We'll have one more in February, and then maybe possibly we'll do a bonus one in the spring as well. So Patricia, this couldn't be at a better time, I'm thinking, time of the year, compassion fatigue with our teachers and our parents and of the caregivers in our constituency. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And like Greg said, you know, we have a great lineup of speakers this year. If you were here for the October talk, we heard from Dr. Justine Okerson, who is a Lausanne alum. She talked about emotional intelligence and college advising and college admissions. And then we have a great speaker in the spring too, who I'll talk about a little after. But it is a really kind of nice thing to know that the school that we're at and the community we're in does care about the social and emotional health of our students, of our faculty, of our parents, of our community. So I'm really excited about tonight, partially because I agree with Greg. This is a time of year when we're all taking care of everyone else. So tonight, we're going to hear from Patricia Smith. She is the founder of the Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project, and I will share the link for that in the chat. She's a compassion fatigue specialist. She's been facilitating workshops, doing keynotes, doing webinars. That's how I found out about her work nationally and internationally for, looks like the past 20 years. I saw her 2016 TED Talk. It was TED San Juan Island, called Navigating the Path to Wellness, Compassion Fatigue and Caregiving. She has a background in journalism. She's written training manuals and books. She's been named a Whiteley Scholar twice, and that's through the Helen R. Whiteley Foundation at the University of Washington in Seattle. So I just want to say how excited I am to have Patricia here today, because it is that time of year, we're all guilty of it. I'm excited because she told me that you're going to leave this presentation with an increased awareness that it's possible to still provide that compassion and that empathy without depleting our own resources. So I'm excited to learn. Patricia, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to share my screen, but I am going to turn my video off for this just to save on internet. We all have crazy weather, it seems like, but I will be here in the chat if anyone needs me. Patricia, just tell me when you'd like me to advance the slides too.
Okay, we're set. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. I know it's your day is the end of your day, and it's been quite a day, election day. I've been glued to the TV today to see what's going on, and you know, all of that is just a lot for all of us after what we've been through with COVID and everything else. I'm just amazed that we're all still standing, to be honest with you. So I do thank Amber. I think it's been about a year that we've been talking about this. We were going to do it before, and then whatever came along, and so it got moved to right now. And I'm a person that believes things happen when they're supposed to. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a very brief slideshow, and that's just to get you kind of thinking and, looking at what I have to offer you, and then relate it to your own experience. So let's get started. Recognizing and managing compassion fatigue. I'm also going to talk about stress and burnout, which I'm running into an awful lot. And what's really interesting is for the last 20 years, it seems like each year, a certain caregiving profession seems to be like a priority. Like 1 year it'll be healthcare. Of course, it was healthcare about 3 years ago with COVID. Maybe it will be social workers 1 year. This year, it has been educators. I have been dealing with webinars. I'm not traveling yet because of COVID, but doing webinars, and it's been educators. And I know from experience, my best friends are teachers. My sister is in the guidance department at Palo Alto High School. I'm very involved with teachers, and I know the kind of things that you're dealing with. And I'm just amazed that you're still going after what you've been through. So thank you very much for your service. And I feel strongly our children are going to do fine. They're resilient, we're resilient, and we're all going to come through this much stronger and better than ever. So with that, let's see first slide and see what we have on the agenda. We're going to just talk a little bit about good health and wellness. What is this thing called compassion fatigue? How to manage stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue, and the challenges. I'm going to reiterate them to you. You know what your challenges are, but sometimes if someone plays it back to you, it kind of, it's like, yeah, I am dealing with that. And then just a few resources. And I am going to leave this PowerPoint with Amber. She can post it wherever is most useful to you. You have my permission to take whatever is on this PowerPoint or, on the agenda and use it in any way that will be helpful to you. So next slide, Amber. So life is not merely to be alive, but to be well. And this was written in the 4th century. So this is something that humans have known for a long, long time. Just going day to day to day, which I think most of us have been doing for the last few years, is not enough. We're supposed to thrive until that very last day when we take our last breath. And I know as I'm getting older, I'm really holding on to that idea that I need to keep growing and changing and thriving as I continue, to get older and older. And I think that's very, very important for all of us to understand. We not only need to be well, but we need to thrive. Next slide. So what is, excuse me, what is wellness? It's an active process of becoming aware of and making choices toward a healthy and fulfilling life. And that's another thing that's really been very clear to me the last few years. It's all about choices. It's the choices we make that create our lives. Wellness is more than being free from illness. It's a dynamic process of growth and change. Okay, next slide. So what is this thing called compassion fatigue? It's a secondary traumatic stress syndrome that can include emotional, physical, and spiritual depletion in those providing care to others. It's associated with caregiving where people or animals are experiencing significant emotional or physical pain and suffering. So there's a good chance that what you do day in, day out is actually traumatizing you. If you see students that are in trouble, if you see your colleagues who seem to be really having a hard time, if you see, experience your own families, people in your own families that are having a hard time, this can cause trauma. And secondary traumatic stress syndrome is what compassion fatigue is. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. Next slide. So what are some of the symptoms? Isolation. And this is a very specific set of symptoms. You want to isolate. People have been coming to you probably all of your life. Most of us were young caregivers, and we carry this pattern right through our lives. We want to isolate because people keep coming to us for things, and we're just worn out. We're depleted. The way that a caregiver stays healthy is you deplete and you fill up. You deplete, you fill up. And that goes on every single day. You have to find things that fill you up because your work, particularly right now, is depleting you. It's depleting all of us, what we're going through. You might have emotional outbursts. What are emotional outbursts about? It means that you've probably been pushing down and pushing down and pushing down everything and saying, I can handle it. I can handle it. I can do that later. I'll make a list. I'll do that later. But what happens is this human body finally says, I've had enough of this. And it comes up as an emotional outburst. It's all in there. It's got to come out. You feel sadness. You start feeling apathetic. You have persistent physical ailments. And what's that? That's the headache that won't go away. That's the scratchy throat. That's that pain in the back of our necks, gastrointestinal problems, and low back aches. And what are those? Those are the stress points of the human body. It's basically our bodies telling us, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. We have substance abuse, which we know in this country is a real problem. The opioid addictions are just off the charts. And what is that all about? Whether it's tobacco, alcohol, food, too much computer, pornography, whatever it is, we're self-medicating in order to deal. And what we need to do is we need to take those things that we're doing that maybe aren't so good for us and change them into something that is good for us. Denial. A lot of people I talk to say, oh, I don't have this. I'm fine. I'm fine. Chances are really good you're not fine. That doesn't mean that you aren't, but for the most part, I think most of us are having a pretty rough time right now. You have hypervigilance or hyperarousal. And again, what's that? I see it mostly when I work with ER people, firefighters, law enforcement, people in the ERs in our hospitals. And that's that constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's waiting for the bell to go off. And so our bodies stay in this hyperarousal situation. And that's not good because it sends all kinds of chemicals through our bodies. And you may have recurring nightmares or flashbacks. And that means you're not getting good rest, which is probably the number one thing that helps us get better. If indeed you are having nightmares or flashbacks about things you're experiencing, I really recommend you might want to get some help because it's hard to get through that ourselves. And a good mental health professional is wonderful as far as helping you, figure out how to get through that. Next slide. So what are the causes? Why do some people get high levels of compassion fatigue and some people don't? The main reason is because those of us who have elevated levels of compassion fatigue are other directed. Somewhere along the line, probably as young people, we learned that it was more important to put the needs of others before our own needs. And we carry that pattern into adulthood. That the whole process of becoming well and healing from high levels of compassion fatigue is going from being other directed to being self-directed. And when we're other directed, we're always looking out there. Everything is out there, all the answers, all the problems, all the blame, all the challenges, everything is out there. And as we know, we can't do anything about that because it's out there. We don't have control over that. What we have control over is ourselves. So we become self-directed and we decide what we're going to allow in our lives, who we're going to allow in our lives, what our lives are going to look like. What kind of daily experiences are we going to have? Yeah. I'll give you some ideas how we can work on that one. We provide service to others with stress and work-related trauma. And boy, I'm sure that that's probably the case with a lot of you. Educators have been dealing with so much up and down, working from home and then going into the classroom, and it's just been jerking everyone around. So we probably have high levels of stress and work-related trauma. We have a lack of personal or professional coping skills. And I really think successful life is about coping skills. When something happens that gives us some trouble, we have a toolbox of coping skills, and we say to ourselves, which skill will help me right now? If indeed you're in a situation where there's some trauma, the skill might be deep breathing. And the good thing about deep breathing is you can do it and no one knows you're doing it. Take some very deep breaths. It's nature's way of calming us and helping us to think straight. So having these wonderful coping skills is what we want to do with our lives. We want to start building our coping skills. And the good news about that is you can teach an old dog new tricks. We can learn those coping skills at any stage in our lives. We have a lack of personal boundaries. Perhaps if we have high levels of compassion fatigue, stress, burnout, our personal boundaries are way in here. And part of the journey is bringing those personal boundaries closer and closer to where we protect ourselves more. And we deal with our lives with detached compassion. And I know a lot of people don't like those words, but detached compassion is to be present for someone, to be mindful of what they're going through and not let it become our own. Oftentimes, what we do is we hear about something and we've experienced that too. So we hook that onto our own experience. We have to learn not to do that. And that's just training ourselves to be present for another person, but not bring their trauma into our own traumas. An overdeveloped sense of responsibility. That's something that a lot of caregivers have. Again, probably learned at a very young age. We have a practice of minimizing traumatic events. We're that go-to person. People rely on us. And we like that. We like being that person. But if it gets to the point where it's detrimental to your own well-being, then you have to say, this is bothering me. I can't do this anymore. And where this is really important is with what we call emotional vampires. They're people that will come up to us and dump on us and take all of our energy, leaving us depleted, and then they walk away feeling better. And that's where we have to learn to say no. You know, if that bothers you, then you have to say, no, I can't do this. And there's little tricks you can do about that. If you have someone in your organization or a relative or someone who just constantly is taking your energy, you need that energy for yourself. You can't let people take that energy. If you're going to continue doing the good work you do, you have to save your energy for yourself. Something very simple is, you know, looking at your phone and saying, oh my gosh, I've got a meeting in a few minutes. I need to go. Or there's something else I need to do. Maybe we can talk later, but get yourself out of that. It's very, very important to protect yourself at all times. And we may have a history of unresolved childhood trauma. And I think all of you probably know a lot about that. And the thing is, you know, again, it's unresolved, but we can resolve it with having the right tools and maybe getting some professional help. Next slide. So what leads to high levels of compassion fatigue? What's the difference between stress, burnout, post-traumatic stress, and secondary traumatic stress? Stress is about being anxious, work-related, and life overload. Two types of stress. There's real stress and perceived stress. It's too much coming at you. So real stress is you've got too many deadlines, you've got too many papers to grade, you've got too many meetings to go to. Those are real stresses. You have to figure out how to manage all of that. Perceived stresses are things that you think you can't handle, but you can. And right now, a lot of that stress is coming into this, and we have to figure out ways to understand within our own beliefs in our life, what is real, what is the real stress, and what is the perceived stress. What is burnout? Burnout is being worn out, work-related emotional exhaustion and withdrawal due to increased workload and institutional stress. It's too little. All of a sudden you look around and there's too little direction, there's too little funding, there's too little support, there's just too little. You go from too much stress to too little burnout. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which we've learned so much about in the last few years because of the wounded warriors that have come back, it's a primary stress disorder. It happens to you. It's work-related exposure to extreme or traumatic events. It happens to you. Secondary traumatic stress is work-related secondary exposure to extreme or traumatic events involving people or animals. And that is what compassion fatigue is. It's a secondary stress disorder. And the way I like to explain this is primary stress happens to you. You're driving to work in the morning and you have a fender bender. And you get into work and you find your best friend and you say, oh my gosh, I just got into a little accident. You know, my neck is hurting me. I think I hurt myself. My partner's not going to be happy. Our rents, you know, our insurance is going to go up. I'm going to have to figure out a way to get to and from work because my car needs to be fixed. It happens to you. You feel all of it. Secondary stress is you're that other person and you're taking all this information in. And what you do is you start thinking about, oh yeah, 6 months ago, I had that fender bender and I remember what it was like. It was so difficult to get all the help I needed and put my car in the shop and pay for it and all of that. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about detached compassion. You have to have the coping skills to not bring your own story into the story of another. Okay, detached compassion is being 100% present, being mindful for that other person so that you don't take that stress on and build it in your own secondary way. Okay. Next question. Next slide. So, what is the definition of stress? It's a perceived or real disconnect between a situation and our resource to deal with the situation. It involves changes affecting nearly every system of the body, influencing how people feel and behave. Again, the important thing with this is get to know yourself well enough to know when it's real or perceived. And if it's perceived, you know you're resilient, you can let it go. I can handle this. I've done it before, I can do it again. If it's real stress, that involves something else. That involves organizing, maybe talking to someone else, maybe talking to your supervisor, your boss about how to lessen your load. That's a very real thing. Next slide. So, how do you manage your stress? You identify and label the source of stress. If you don't, you have free floating anxiety and you have no way of dealing with it. You don't know what the coping skills are because you don't know what the stress is. What is causing your stress? And that sometimes takes us a while. Sometimes we just think everything is stressing me right now, everything going on in the country, fear of COVID. Maybe you're dealing with some grief. Maybe you lost someone through this whole thing. All of these things, you have to be able to identify that source of stress in order to move forward and have coping skills to help you get through it. You have to discern if that stress is real or perceived, and I can't stress that enough. You can accept what you cannot change, and you can focus on what you can change. And then you can learn to say no and tighten those personal boundaries. You have to get some of that stress out of your life. Okay, next slide. So the definition of burnout. Burnout is characterized by emotional exhaustion and negative attitudes and feelings toward one's coworkers and job role. Burnout is associated with job dissatisfaction, low commitment to the job, and absenteeism. In 2019, the World Health Organization reclassified burnout as an occupational phenomenon, not a medical condition. Burnout refers specifically to a phenomenon in the occupational context and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of your life. I hope that makes sense to you because it's so very important to understand that. Burnout is associated with your job. Okay. Compassion fatigue can be in your private life, it can be in your job as well. So, how do we manage burnout? We evaluate our job options. I remember once I worked in textbook publishing for many, many years, and I had to tell one of my marketing managers that she was in the wrong job. And she took it very, very hard, but she definitely was in the wrong job. And I won't go into it, but we had a lot of talks about it. We had those difficult conversations, and she finally saw that that was true. And she went and got a job at the Library of Congress as a librarian. And that was so much better for her than marketing. She just was not a marketing person. So evaluate your job options. Are you in the right job? It's okay to change jobs. Hopefully you have some wonderful opportunities where you are. Seek support. Talk to your manager. Talk to career people. Find ways to get support if you're feeling like maybe you're burning out. Exercise. I can't stress that enough. When you get home, and now, of course, we've got daylight saving times gone, which is unfortunate because we used to have a little bit more light to be able to go out and do these things. But figure out a way to get more exercise. And what that's about is you've got all this going on inside of you, and it has to come out. Whether it's through journaling or exercise or talking to a good friend or something, we have to get what's inside out there, or it'll just do things to your body that are not healthy. Sleep and rest as much as possible. Don't feel guilty about taking a nap on a Saturday if indeed you can. Rest your body so that you can think clearly and take time off if that's possible. Next slide. So how do we manage compassion fatigue? We accept that your situation is stressful, and this I can't stress enough. I've been hearing this so much from people in different caregiving professions. I got into this profession because I wanted to help, and it isn't getting any better. In fact, if anything, it's getting worse. And you know what? It is getting worse. Sometimes we have wonderful times when things are getting better, and we have to hold on to those times, and we have to do them more. But for the most part, things are getting more and more difficult. and they will for a while. I think things will level out, eventually. But right now, our situations are very, very stressful. And hopefully we're moving towards a time when things aren't as stressful for all of us. Try to create that balance between work, relationships, and me time. And I can tell you what I do, but that's not going to help you. You have to decide yourself. How are you going to create that balance? Because it's all about you. Build that healthy support system. Have friends, relatives, neighbors who support you, who aren't negative. We need, positivity right now. We need people to say it's going to get better. And if you're feeling down, you have to go to a friend that's going to pat you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I've seen you do some difficult things before. You can do it again, and you will." Practice authentic, sustainable self-care daily. Make sure it's authentic to you. We have a society that's telling us what we should do, what color we should wear, how we should wear our hair, what car we should drive, what school we should go to. We have to stop listening to all of that noise. Spend some time with ourselves and figure out what's authentic to you and follow that as your guide. What's authentic to me is reading. I read 5 books a week. I love reading. I love books. I love being with my family. I'm a walker. I walk 2 to 3 hours a day, miles a day. I know what real pets. I don't have a pet right now, but I'll tell you, when I walk, I run into people with dogs, and I just get my dog fix every single day. So you have to find out what's authentic to you, what fills you up. I look in the eyes of a little dog, and it fills me up. And it has to be sustainable, because things are going to keep moving forward, and we have to be able to sustain that. Practice self-compassion. And one of the things I've noticed, I know I'm really, really bad at this. They often say we teach what we need to learn ourselves. And the other day I was reading a book on self-compassion, and I thought, I'm not very compassionate to myself. I have tremendous compassion for others, but not myself. And I had an aha moment. Something inside of me said, "You've had some rough times in your life. You need to be kinder to yourself." And something happened, and I had a turnaround, a switch, and an aha moment. And I've noticed a difference in the last few days of being a little kinder to myself. So I hope the same for you. Strengthen those coping skills, be resilient. You did it before, you can do it again. Enhance your communication skills so that you feel like you're being heard. This is another thing I hear from people. Nobody listens to me. Well, you have to figure out why they don't listen to you. Do you have solutions? If you have challenges, you've got to have solutions as well. And take the professional quality of life self-test, which I will give you the link to that. This is the measurable we're all using. It gives you your level of burnout, your compassion fatigue, and your compassion satisfaction, which we'll talk about in a minute too. Next slide. So your challenges. I'm just going to replay them for you, because this is what I've been hearing for the last 5 or 6 months. Shortage of educators. They claim, media claims that 55% of educators are either leaving or considering leaving. And that is going to leave us in a very dire situation. You have staffing issues, finding qualified candidates to fill positions. You have to have qualified people in the jobs. High turnover rate, quitting and retiring. Continuous growth, managing multiple services. My goodness, your school has so many different services. And it's a funny thing, because when I'm in, actually giving a presentation in person, I have a lot more back and forth with people. And I say, if your organization gets a grant or more money coming in, or a donation or something, what do you do with that money? And they say, "Oh, we offer new services." I don't know that that's the answer. I think offering more and more, more is not always better. How about improving what we already have? And I see that. I think teachers are feeling this, and parents. Yeah, definitely. Ever-changing environment. My goodness, I don't have to tell you about that. COVID-19, it's been really an eye-opener, hasn't it? Funding, lack of trust between, I know in organizations, it's lack of trust between management and workers, staff, and volunteers. There's this lack of trust everywhere. We don't trust anyone. any place we look, and we have to start building trust with each other. We have to do that, or we're not going to get through this. And of course, campus-wide compassion fatigue. Next slide. And what is that? When the majority of students, and this isn't just for educators, this is your students too. We don't know what's going on in their personal lives, or maybe you do. They may be having a real hard time at home. There may be problems with their parents, with their siblings. We don't know what they're going through, and they may have compassion fatigue. It can start very, very young. So you might have staff and students all having elevated levels of compassion fatigue. And if that happens, the whole organization, the whole school, the whole campus becomes compassion fatigued. Next slide. And what do you see when this happens? You see high absenteeism. If you have 2 days of a scratchy throat or a backache or digestive problems, you're not going to go to work. Students aren't going to come to school. You're going to stay home. So what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on the people that are there. You have a lack of flexibility. People dig in their heels and they don't want to change. You get that us versus them mentality and the blame. The blame is out there. You have a lack of vision for your future, which is so important in education. We have to assume it's all going to get so much better. And education is continue to, do the best we can for our students. We undermine the mission of the school and low levels of compassion satisfaction. Next slide. I do a lot of work with organizations and mission statements. I can't tell you how important they are. Your mission statement is your branding. It's telling the public who you are. It's telling your parents who you are. It's telling your funders who you are. So you must stick to that. And when you hire new people, the first thing you need to ask them as your PR people or your HR people is, do your personal values align with the values of the school? And your mission statement is to prepare each of its students for college and for life in a global environment. That is a beautiful mission statement. I must tell you, sometimes a group will hand me their mission statement and it'll be like 5 paragraphs long. And I just look at it and say, there's no way you can do all this. There's just no way. It's too much. Your words are carefully chosen. You're preparing your students for college and for a life in the global environment, which is a global service. It's to be, have your eyes wide open to the whole world and be of service. So whenever you feel low or you don't know what you're doing there or you question what you're doing, pull out your mission statement and remind yourselves why you're there, because that's why you're there. And if you have people who do not agree with this, that say, oh, high school students don't need to prepare for college. They can do that when they get into college. They're going to try to change your mission statement and they're going to try to change your environment. So you want to make sure everyone is on board for exactly what this is. Next slide. So compassion satisfaction, that's the pleasure we derive from doing our work. It's as simple as that. And it's like bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. The higher your compassion satisfaction, the lower your compassion fatigue. It's that simple. Okay, it balances out. Next slide. Before I do the resources, some of the things that people tell me about the what their compassion satisfaction, it can be anything from the beauty of your campus to the services you provide for the students, to the parents who are very supportive. But the one I get the most is your colleagues. That's the thing I get the most is what really keeps me coming here every day is my colleagues, my dedicated friends who are here every day for the same reason. So think about why you show up every day. Some resources, my website, compassionfatigue.org, my TED Talk is there. I have a Facebook. I post quotes and just different things that might be helpful. The ProQual. This is the Professional Quality of Life Self-Test. It's the life's work of Dr. Beth Ednall-Stam. Dr. Beth is now retired in Montana, but she keeps working even though she says she's retired. And it is the measurable we use to find out if we have high levels of compassion fatigue. And more than 20 years ago, I took that test not knowing, I'd never heard the words compassion fatigue. And I took that test and that's what told me I had high levels of compassion fatigue and started me on a 20-year journey. The Healing Trust, one of the things you might want to do is make yourself a self-care plan. and stick to it. There's templates there if you don't want to design your own. The Johns Hopkins um, School of Bloomberg School of Business has psychological first aid. It's like, I took it, it's like $49, $99, and there's 6 sessions, and it teaches you all about how to take care of each other. It's a wonderful course and would be very helpful, I think, to all of you. Greater Good at Berkeley, UC Berkeley in California, has a wonderful science center. I know you stress mindfulness in your work. They have a lot of tests. It's all free. They have studies. They have all kinds of wonderful things with mindfulness and taking care of ourselves and things like that. And then if you want to learn more about trauma, this is a Canadian website that I found very, very helpful in the work I do. So it's a trauma recovery. So with that, I'm going to get back to Amber. And are there any questions or comments? I know that was a lot of information in a very short time, but if anything jumped out at you and you want to share, I love to hear what you have to say, because really, I think you learn more from each other if you share some things, because you're all in the same environment. And what normally happens is I see each other, everyone shaking their head like, yes, I know what you're talking about. So with that, Amber, do we have anything that we want to discuss further?
So I don't see anything in the comments yet. Of course, everyone is welcome to unmute and ask questions. But I'll kind of kick us off because I actually have a question I feel like I know the answer to, but maybe I just need some validation that I'm feeling the right things. So I think a lot of us probably struggle with this issue of, we know someone, whether it's us or for me, it's my mom, who is the most caring, giving person. But often she does it to the detriment of herself. And so it's like, I'm watching it happen, and then I'm stressed out because I'm trying to have compassion for her, who's having compassion for somebody else who I may or may not know. And I find myself losing my boundaries and being like, oh, well, let me do this thing I don't really want to do, or we'll talk about it for 4 hours after I've been at work all day. Or what do you suggest for people who are kind of getting that, like, I'm not actually involved in the situation, but a person I love is, and now I kind of am too. What do you suggest for people who are facing that?
That's a great question. And I get that all the time. And it's mostly within the organization. We have one person in our department, and everyone, it's so obvious. She's highly compassion fatigue. She has all of the symptoms. She creates drama all the time. She stresses all of us out. What do we do about her? So, this is your mother. And I know that's a whole different thing. That's like caregiving for a family member, as opposed to being a professional caregiver in a home for, elderly people. What you need to do is include her in some of the things you've learned. Set some time aside, go have a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning or something, and tell her about the professional quality of life test. Tell her, gee, I learned about this thing called compassion fatigue, and it's all about boundaries, and share and be inclusive. You don't want to, it's your mother, so you wouldn't do this, but in the workplace, I hear a lot of people, I want to go up to her and shake her and say, stop doing that. Don't you see what you're doing to our department? We're not getting our work done because you bring so much drama. You never want to do that. We don't diagnose each other. That's the worst thing we could ever do. I have people come up to me all the time when I present in person and want me to diagnose them. Number one, I'm not a mental health professional. My background is in journalism. My work is experiential and is backed up by the traumatologist, the world's best traumatologist, Dr. Charles Figley. You don't want to put them in a spot. You want to include them and say, this is what I've learned. And then offer some thoughts on it and say, is there anything I can do to help? And if your mother says, no, I think I'm going to think about this. This is really interesting. Let it go. Let her do that. I don't know what else you can do, because you need to practice empathic discernment. And that's exactly what you just said. I keep doing it, even though I know it's becoming detrimental to me. You have to know when it's causing you trouble. And that's where your boundary is. And you can't control your mother. You can only control yourself, but you can share what you've learned. and hope that you care enough, that she recognizes that you care enough to bring this up. That's a very difficult conversation to have. What I'm telling you right now is to actually sit her down and take the time, not on the fly, like when you're both in the kitchen getting a meal ready for the family or something, you're there for a holiday or something, but a specific time. Take that time out of your busy schedule that works for you. Like I said, if it's a Saturday morning or a Thursday after work that works for you, hey mom, let's go have dinner. I want to talk to you about something I just learned. And hopefully that will help. It's very hard to change, but you might express your own feelings too about how it's detrimental to you, and you need to reserve your energy for your family and your work and yourself. I think any mother would take note of that and not want to do that.
Thank you.
Does that
Yeah,
help? Does that help?
absolutely. I mean, I think too that we see that with coworkers too. We see somebody who's so emotionally invested, and it's like,
Yes.
I'm stressed because you're stressed, and I'm removed, but I also care about you. I think it's a hard place to be in when you feel like you're an outsider looking in.
Yes.
But I
And
agree. I think
most of us that go into caregiving, any kind of caregiving, we're what they call empaths, EMPATHS. And if you don't know what an empath is, a highly sensitive person. It's not a bunch of, touchy-feely stuff. It's very real. Some of us are able to walk by a person and pick up their stress. It's just who we are. We're very aware and we're highly sensitive. So, checking out studies on empaths is very, very important to understand yourself more, and that you do that. And then you get to make a decision whether to stop and say something to the person and say, you don't look so happy today. Is there something I can do? Or just wish them well and move on because your schedule is so full. It's okay to do that.
awesome.
And I'm
Thank
not saying it lightly. I've had to do it in my own life, and it's been very difficult. But I feel better about myself doing that. And I think I serve that person better by just wishing them well in my own consciousness, as opposed to stopping and saying, what can I do?
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you. That's hard for people. I think it's hard for me.
Oh,
So
it's so hard.
I think part of it is, we're very symbiotic by nature and we feed off of each other's energy. So a lot of what you said really resonated with me as kind of the SEL person on campus. And I also teach mindfulness. One thing that we really try to stress to our faculty, to our parents, to people that we work with is the whole concept of self-compassion. But a lot of us have been taught, I'm in my 50s, Amber's a lot younger than me, but sort of the generation above us, at least our parents, saw self-compassion as selfish, maybe, or lavish, not to stereotype an entire generation, but
It's so true. It's so true, Greg.
and
Yeah.
I have a hard time getting through working with people on this. Everyone from students at Lausanne to like college basketball players I work with, the whole concept of just being kind to yourself and drawing boundaries. It's really interesting. I'm trying to think. There was a gentleman at Harvard who wrote a couple of really good books on it with Kristen, I think her name was Nerf, from University of Texas. But it's sort of the demystification of that notion that it's lavish or selfish, or it's it's very cliche, but I always think of the oxygen mask and the airplane metaphor, right?
Right.
It's been beaten to death now in memes and everything else in popular culture, but it's like, if we can't breathe and take care of ourselves first, then we're no good to anyone else in our lives. So
That is so true. And I thank you for the work you do. It's a tough one. And you are exactly right. It's what I was raised with. And certainly my parents were raised with. And that's that if you think about yourself first, you're selfish, you're self-centered. And then what that does is it makes us feel guilty and self-serving, and we have to get over it. And it isn't just get over it. It's, you've got to work at getting over it.
Mhm.
You've got to work at getting over it. And you're no good to anyone if you're not healthy and strong and happy. You know, a lot of people that are there for everyone else are not happy because their own needs aren't being met. And there, as you said, there's a lot going on about this. The mindfulness movement is just spectacular.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yes, yes, and it's helpful to have all these studies behind us to say we know this is true, and the interconnectedness. We're all interconnected, whether we like to believe it or not, but we are, and we do feel each other's pain and grief, and that's a whole another thing. And I'm sure you do deal a lot with that, loss and grief. We're all grieving. We lost our lives. We lost hugging our loved ones. We lost our health in some cases. We lost people, really lost people through death with COVID. We lost so much, and now we're grieving, and we have to get through that and move forward because we want to be happy. We want to be fulfilled. We want to help others. And in order to do that, we really, really need to have those good, strong boundaries so we can be strong. And then we're there to help others.
I think so too. And I really liked what you said about giving yourself permission to feel. There was that great book, Amber, that we read that came out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence a couple years ago. And I think a lot of it starts with, and you touched on this, emotional literacy. I think it's so important, and it's so good that we're starting to see this taught in more and more school systems.
Yeah, it's the only way that the education system's going to survive. It's just, it's true. Let's see what we have here.
Yeah, I think it's starting to be politicized, though, believe it or not. SEL is, and I'm not getting political one way or the other, but SEL is now.
You can't help it. Everything is being politicized. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's about being kind to each other. It's about listening to each other. And it's about being there for others. And it's not right or wrong. It's all one. It's, I hear you. I know exactly what you're saying. And the best way we can serve that is by knowing ourselves, knowing our limits, knowing what we're good at, knowing what we need to work on, knowing we have coping skills so that others around us maybe could see how to deal with things better. We learn from each other. Certainly students learn from teachers. I mean, I have 3 adult children, and they still talk about their teachers. They also went to a collegiate school in Los Altos in California, and their teachers set them on their way in a way that I never expected as a parent. They recognized them and their talents and said, have you ever thought of? And it all happened. So you affect them every single day, and you have to be your best. And being your best means taking care of yourself. And teaching them boundaries as well. Mm-hmm. You know, they need to see you eating lunch. They need to see you, you know what I mean? It's the same as in an organization, in a business. When I do, present in person, which I probably will start doing next year, one of the first things I ask is, okay, it'll be 300 people, and I'll say, how many of you eat lunch? And they all giggle, like, yeah, right, lady, as if we have time for lunch. And I say, you need to start eating lunch, especially if you're a supervisor or a manager or a vice president, a CEO, because if you don't eat lunch, they won't eat lunch because they're watching you. And that's what students do with teachers. They watch you and they learn from you.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. You're out in the field doing it.
Well, and one of the things that I actually texted Greg while you were talking was, I have a teenage daughter. She's in 9th grade. Greg knows her. She's
great.
I can't imagine her not being great with Amber as a mother.
Thank you. She's a lot. But one of the things I've noticed, and when I think back to it, of course, I remember this feeling, but teenage relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic relationships or relationships with their parents or with teachers, they're so intense.
Okay.
And I liken it to like when you're out of something, like I don't have that many feelings anymore. I can't give that much intensity, but their relationships and their feelings are so much. This idea of regulating how you react to other people and giving people compassion, but also holding on to some of that compassion for yourself. I texted Greg and I said, this is a great thing to talk to our students about, because they get so wrapped up in other people's things and their, what's happening in their day to day. And I try to tell all of them, it doesn't matter that much. Like, care about your friends, but take care of yourself. And I think that's a good message to give to our students, especially because of that intensity.
Yeah. And it's a teachable moment when you see that intensity with your daughter, to teach her a coping skill. I see that this is really important to you, and I can see the intensity, and it means so much to you, and it is important. Relationships are important, but you need to take a really deep breath and relax. And let's talk about this more, because, teenagers, especially, I went through 3 of them and often had their friends living with us because they had so many problems in their home. Everything is just over the top, and they're so other directed. They're looking to see if they fit in. They're looking to see if they're wearing the right clothes. They're looking to see if they're saying the right things, if they're dating the right, guy or girl, or everything is out there. And very few of them are self-directed. You'll get some, I had one of mine was very self-directed. He was very involved in theater. And that, you probably know this from your environment. Oh, they form a tight knit group and they support each other. And they're in a sense, sort of the outsiders. I know Blake and his friends were kind of the outsiders, except when they put on a production, then they were the stars of the school, So very few teenagers are self-directed. And I think that's a part of the growth. That's a natural part of the growth. They have to check out everything around them to see, number one, if they fit in. And being inclusive is so very important. And we're seeing this with the violence and, the school shootings. Oftentimes it's that one one young person that was not included. They were always alone, and it's hard. It's hard for people, young people to go up and say, why don't you come and eat lunch with us? You're new to the school. It's very hard, but encourage them to do that. They can change a person's life by how they treat them at that time. That's what's important.
Yeah,
and they'll bring those lessons. They'll bring those lessons with them.
My poor kid, I'm like, hey, there's a new kid at school. You want to go be your friend? So I do that a lot. I think she rolls her eyes as she leaves. But no, I definitely agree. And I remember those feelings as a teenager too, thinking this is the most important thing. And my friendships, and of course they were important and they shaped who I was, but I could have put a lot more effort into myself and a little less of those feelings into others, I think. And so I try to remember that, but especially being not just around my own teenager, but around hundreds of teenagers.
Yeah.
Remembering those feelings is important.
I think you have to remind them you were young once too.
They don't believe me. They're like, oh yeah.
But times were different. You walk 10 miles in the snow to get to school and all that. I said, no, but yeah. Right. We have to remember who they are, and they're working so hard, to grow and yeah, it's a tough time.
Well, especially when you look at one of my students in my class the other day was like, they were showing me a shirt that they wanted. And I was like, I literally had that in high school. And they were like, oh my God, were you trendy in high school? I was like, ooh, don't love the way we phrased that, but yes. You feel like a pillar of dust sometimes, but remembering those feelings is important, I think.
Yeah.
Awesome. So do we have any other questions? And if you don't want to unmute or you can't unmute, please feel free to put them in the chat too, and I'm happy to read them.
And the other thing that I failed to mention is if there's something, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional, but I will always find you the answer you need from the person who does know what they're talking about when it comes to mental health. Patricia at compassionfatigue.org. You can email me and I will find you the answer you need. Or if you want me to repeat something or you have a specific situation, do you have any suggestions for me? I'm always happy to offer what I know, what I've learned in 20 years of doing this work. And sometimes, people, there's an aha with that, and I'm happy to offer that, definitely. And the main thing is I hope it was helpful, and I hope, my main concern is if you just take one thing away, then I feel like I've done my job. Just one thing. The other day, it's a couple of weeks ago now, I gave a talk at Farmingdale College in New York, and I got an email the next day, and one of the educators wrote me and she said, it was a real eye-opener. All this time I thought I was compassion fatigued, and now I know it's not compassion fatigue. I'm burnt. I am burnt out. And the difference became very obvious to me when I saw the list. And I just wrote and said, thank you for telling me that. I mean, that's huge. To think you have high levels of compassion fatigue and you have burnout. They're two different things, different coping skills, different things you can do, different strategies. And so she was on her way. She said, I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to read more about burnout as opposed to all this compassion fatigue information I've been getting. So hopefully there's an aha in there somewhere and that it's all helpful and useful to you.
Yeah, I feel like I learned a lot from what you've said, and from, of course, I get the preview of the slides, and I feel like sometimes we think, oh, I'm so burnt out, or, oh, I'm just tired, or I don't feel
yeah,
right. It's some kind of stress, and Greg and I have talked about this. Not all stress is bad, but
right.
when you have stress
can motivate. Yes.
Identifying what your stress is the first step to doing anything about it, whether it's positive stress or negative stress. I feel like I definitely have some compassion fatigue, but I also have some burnout. And how do I then approach that? So I've definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, me too. We really appreciate it. Thank you for taking.
You're very welcome. I'm glad it finally happened. Like I said, and then when we had snow and high winds, I thought, oh no, the internet's going to go out. So I'm very glad.
Well worth the wait. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And now you can all go have some dinner probably and turn on the news and see who's doing what.
Oh my goodness. Talk about stress.
Yeah.
Talk about stress.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good evening.
I take a lot of deep breaths while I'm watching the election results.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please, of course, I put Patricia's email in the chat, but I'll also include it when I send the video out. I'll also put all the links, which I'm actually going to go take the self-assessment because I think that is really useful. So I'll put all that out. And of course, I'll make sure that I send everything with the video and all of the links. Before you go, I do just want to really quickly, it's always interesting. We don't ever do this on purpose, but we always look at the calendar after we kind of set all of the talks, and they all kind of work together. So in February, we have Dr. Brian Davidson, who's going to be talking to us about developing mindsets. So we talked about emotional intelligence in October. We're talking about using some of that emotional intelligence to assess and kind of see where you're at with compassion fatigue, with burnout. And then once we've done that work, we're going to talk about developing mindsets in February. And I don't plan any of this. It all just happens.
I was going to say that was very, because we didn't.
Yeah.
You tied that together nicely.
Plan it, but sometimes it's you're not aware. It's an unconscious thing, and you're so good at what you do. You just know.
Throw things and they happen, So, but I think that that's really interesting that we just talked about how to look at ourselves, and now we're going to talk in February about mindsets and how we set those, how we use those skills. So Patricia, I would love to have you there if you're willing to talk about that too. We would love to have you as like a person in the audience to chat. Everybody who's here tonight, we would love to have you there as well. It's February 21st. If you are at Lausanne, you also know that that is the week of auction. So when I look a little frazzled and I'm working on
about stress,
burnout and stress, that's why. But it's going to be very fun. But Patricia, like Greg said, it was absolutely worth the wait. Thank you so much for being here. And when you start traveling again, Memphis is the place to be. I'm telling you. So,
okay. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'm here if you need me, and just keep me posted. Sure, I'd be happy to listen. And I listen to podcasts all the time. I learned so much. So much is coming out, and Greg knows this, I'm sure, with the work he does. It's almost too much. It's such good stuff.
Yeah, it's a full-time job trying to keep up with it. You're right. It's a lot.
Lots of good things. So I'm happy to be able to help out in any way I can, especially educate. Okay.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.